You're listening to the Sisters in Loss podcast, a faith-based grief and loss podcast for Black women, where you will hear stories of miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility to learn there is a testimony in tragedy. You will learn how to heal, gain clarity, find hope and peace, and turn your pain into your purpose after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee. Welcome to episode 95 of the Sisters in Loss podcast. May is always a difficult and painful month for us sisters in loss. I'm here to let you know that you're still a mother on this Mother's Day and every day of the year. If you had a miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility challenges. Celebrate this Mother's Day in your own special way and reflect on your baby in heaven and the future babies that will be here with you on earth. I love you, sisters in loss, and know that we are here to support you, love on you, and encourage you in every way. Join us in our private community at sistersinloss.com. In today's episode, we have Kieona Fairley, who shares her stillbirth story of son London and her book, London's Footprint. Kieona shares in this episode how her water broke during Thanksgiving 2011 at 41 weeks pregnant, only to find out her son London did not have a heartbeat. She recounts this traumatic experience and how she is using her story to help heal herself and others through her book, London's Footprints. This episode is for you to listen to if you have experienced a stillbirth or want to know how to use your story to heal others by becoming an author. Here is Kieona Fairley. Well, thank you, Kieona, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, so my name is Kieona Fairley, and I like to say my societal job because I am on this path of wanting to live in purpose, but I work in clinical research now in Philadelphia for the American College of Radiology. I work as a junior data manager. I've been doing that for about 2 years. I also am a mom of a 5-year-old son named Micah. And I just recently released my first memoir, London's Prince, in September. So I am officially an author.
Awesome. Amazing. So take us back on your journey to motherhood and share with us your loss story.
Okay, so such a very interesting story. Let's see. So my first son, I conceived him in 2011, and this was my firstborn son that I had lost. Let's see. The whole entire pregnancy was very different. It was obviously my first experience, but I did have a 2-vessel cord in that pregnancy, which the doctors weren't concerned about at the time. And they didn't make it seem like it was something that I would have to be concerned about. He was growing at a normal rate, never had any issues. I went to every doctor's appointment, never missed an appointment, made sure that I was taking my prenatal vitamins, definitely taking care of myself. However, one thing that I can say was my relationship with my son's father at the time wasn't the healthiest relationship emotionally. But however, I maintained and, did a lot of self-care. So I noticed, it was about a week or so. It was like, when you get later into the pregnancy, you tend to go to the physicians frequently. I was 40 weeks pregnant. I would go to the doctors about every 2 days at that point. And I was actually home already. And during that time when I was pregnant with my son, I was actually working as a correctional officer. So I had stopped working about a couple of weeks prior. So I was at home and, we had some friends over and I cooked just something normal. And for some reason that day, I was feeling a little strange. I had noticed that I didn't feel as much fetal movement as I normally did. And so I decided to make a drink that I normally have made. It was like this really sweet strawberry lemonade that I would make because, sugar would make the baby a lot more active, of course. So I drank the strawberry lemonade and I didn't feel anything. So at that moment, it was like something within me kind of knew intuitively that something wasn't right. So I waited about an hour or so later and called the doctor's office and let them know. And they had told me to come in. And I went and proceeded to the emergency room. It's like a section. It was, the maternal section of the emergency room. And they had me come in. And the doctor proceeded to... Oh, sorry. I'm kind of skipping things now that I'm getting all screwed up about it. So let me start back. So it was actually 2011 on Thanksgiving Day. That was when it exactly started. So Thanksgiving that day, Thanksgiving of 2011, my water had broke. So I remember I was sitting around with family and we were about to cut the turkey. And literally, as soon as I was about to cut the turkey, I felt water gush down. And I was like, you know what? It's time. My water just broke. And they had told me, my family was like, oh, okay, we already had our bags packed and stuff. So we ended up going home. I went and took a shower. My boyfriend at the time was very anxious, and so was I, of course. We went to go grab the bags and we went to the emergency room. So we decided to go to the emergency room. It was Thanksgiving Day, and the doctor or the nurse on call at the time, did a fetal check. So she basically just checked to see did an ultrasound to see if my water did break. And she also did like a cervix exam. She told me that there was no pooling and that it didn't seem like my water broke at that time. So they called the doctor that was on call, and the doctor just suggested for me to come back in the following Tuesday that I had a following appointment. So they said, you know what, your water didn't break. We'll send you home. The baby seems fine. They checked the fetal monitor. He's doing okay. There's no pooling. That's the signs of the normal water breaking. And I just took what they told me and, suggested, okay, if this is what the doctors are saying, I'm going to go home. Again, like I said, it was a Thanksgiving evening, very short staffed. There was barely nobody in the hospital at the time. So throughout the week, I had leaking going on, and I was going to the doctors every 2 days, and the doctors would do their normal cervix exam, check to see, how far along I was dilated. They told me that, my water didn't break. The baby's probably sitting on your bladder. You'll be fine. We just want you to go into labor on your own. We're not going to induce you. Now, at this point, I was up to almost 41 weeks. So I wanted to feel the fetal movement, and that was when intuitively I felt like my something wasn't right. I had went to the doctors continuously throughout a whole entire week, and they kept telling me that my water didn't break. And so that's when I proceeded to go in that following day when I wanted to feel some fetal movement, and got to the hospital, and the doctors were there. The nurse was very nice. She sat me down and she was just really excited. She was like, oh, there's nothing for you to worry about. You'll be fine. And she proceeds to go get the heart monitor to check the baby's heart. And so she just kept going around my stomach with it. And she was like, She was like, maybe it's because, there's not too much room because I was so far along. And they would tell me was the further that you get along, the less room that the baby has to move. And so she just kept going around with the fetal heart monitor and she couldn't hear anything. So then she started to make this face. And then I instantly told my boyfriend at the time to leave the room. And so she goes to get the doctor, and the doctor comes in and he proceeds to go around my stomach with the heart monitor as well. And he says, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we cannot find a heartbeat. They ended up doing a ultrasound, and the ultrasound obviously showed that there was no more amniotic fluid and that my son was deceased at the time. And right then and there, it was like, I just kind of fell to my knees. I had no, I really didn't believe that type of stuff still happened. I ended up calling one of my family members, and then one of my very close girlfriend at the time had came rushing into the hospital, and she actually just recently got into a car accident and she had a broken leg. And so everybody was just rushing in because it was just nobody could believe it. And I did so much preparation for my son at the time. I moved, I prepared his room, had everything all set up. I had everything prepared for him in a manner that it was like I was ready for him, got everything settled. And I would have never thought in a million years that people still experience fetal loss and so far along. So when the doctors had told me that, that was, just extremely traumatic. And my second question was, okay, so how are we going to do this? Like, what's going to happen next? Am I going to have a C-section? How are you guys going? How is he going to come out? So they told me that I had to give birth. And that was it for me and my boyfriend at the time, because it was like, are you kidding me? Like, you have to give physical birth to the child, because it's just like, you're going to have to go through a process of pain, of giving birth to death. So that was an eye opener for me. And I feared what he would look like. I feared the experience just alone. It was basically like me giving birth to something that was already dead. And it's like, I knew that I had to put in the hard work for something that I was going to leave empty-handed. And so after going through the process and them talking to me, telling me that I didn't understand it at the time, but me going through that and giving birth to him would help with the healing process. And I didn't understand it at the time, but it obviously did. And I could go into that later. But I ended up going home that night. And of course, I still did not deliver my son. They had induced me the following morning. The induction, it just was like, everything was just so silent. Everything was silent. It was just a very numb situation for me. I didn't know what to feel. And to be honest with you, in a span of 24 hours in that experience, I probably felt every emotion that you can think of. Going into the hospital room, being on the same wing as women that were giving birth to live children really was disturbing to me. I was really disappointed about the fact that the doctors seemed like they weren't even prepared for a situation like a stillbirth. The empathy, the lack of empathy, just the way that the hospital went about it. And I felt like they are not very educated on how to deal with it. I remember going through the induction process, getting the drugs that they had gave me because they didn't want me to feel anything. And it was like, I remember going through the whole birthing process. My friend and her mom was on one leg. My friend was on the other. And it was like, my boyfriend at the time was standing on the right of me. And it was just like, it was kind of a bittersweet moment. It was like, wow, we all get to finally meet him. But then I had to plan a funeral at the same time. So then also, like, after giving birth to him, being in that room and hearing the babies cry next door and going out of the room. And I remember going to get myself some ice or some water. I don't know what it was, but I just wanted to leave the room for a second. And I remember going out to get the ice or the water and seeing this purple plant, this purple pitcher. It's like a dark purple with a leaf, I believe it is. And it has the teardrop. And it's the sign that is, like, I guess the signature sign of the hospital, or maybe it's something across the country that they utilize when a family's grieving. So nobody could, come in and disturb them. And leaving the hospital, I could just remember I was numb and my boyfriend at the time was extremely angry. And the doctors came in constantly apologizing about what was going on, not being very resourceful. And at the time, all I remember is them wanting to provide me with some form of medication, like some type of anti-anxiety medication. They wanted to send me home with some antidepressants, whatever it was. It was like they were going to say, hey, you know what? Here's the drugs for you to deal with the pain that you just went through. We're going to send the hospital pastor. And he came to speak to me, and they gave me his footprints, which I left the hospital with my son's footprints, and some hair. And it was very hard when I left the hospital because it was like, again, I just went through a life and death situation to give birth to something that was already dead. And it took me a while to understand it, hence the fact that it took me so long to write this book. But in that process of my son dying and never getting a chance to breathe, because to be honest with you, when you're sitting there, and a lot of women, I've heard stories, a lot of women never really held the child because of fear. That was the most healing thing for me, but it was kind of, like I said, bittersweet, because all I wanted him to do was scream or cry. It was not normal. It was just complete silence. And I've come to believe truly that in my son's death, I was actually reborn. And going back home empty-handed, having the mom, my body has been completely changed. I feel like as a woman, we give pieces of ourselves when we give birth. Every time that we give birth, we give pieces of ourselves. And it was like my body, there's a cord beyond the cord. I honestly believe. I believe there's a cord beyond the cord, the umbilical cord. It's a spiritual cord where you and a child are connected. And even though he wasn't physically there, my body knew that he was supposed to be there. So you're breastfilled with milk. Your body is changed now. You are missing a piece of you that you actually grew in you. And so, to be honest with you, for years, I carried the weight that I carried during my pregnancy. I felt like unconsciously I was holding on to something. And to be honest with you, I honestly believe that I had moments of phantom kicks. A lot of people may not know this, but in the medical industry, they talk about if someone loses a leg, say if they're diabetic or something like that, and they happen to lose their leg, if they have to get it cut off or whatever else like that, they still feel phantom pain. Like they feel like there's a pain at the end of their leg, like there's a connection to it. And mentally, I believe that there were moments where I felt phantom kicks or my connection to him. And it was a life-changing experience. And I experienced so much death in my life. I've seen a lot in my family. And to be direct, my grandmother had passed away exactly a year before my son had died. Exactly. The last day that I saw my grandmother before she went into cardiac arrest in 2010 was on Thanksgiving Day. That's the same day that my water had broke. And usually in the family, my grandmother's a Southern woman. They talk about usually when someone dies, a baby is born. So in 2010, when my grandmother passed away and she was the soul core of the family, it was like, to me, oh, this has to be it. Like my son has to be the gift for the family, because this is what usually happens. There's life after death. And they also say that people die in threes. I have no idea why they say that. Like death comes in threes. And as time had progressed, I looked at it as my grandmother passed in 2010, my son passed in 2011, and I spiritually died that same day as my son.
Wow. Well, take us back on that spiritual and that healing journey after loss. Tell us about the memorial process or the funeral that you planned, and then really how, when people started going home and you were there left alone, really, how did you deal with your grief?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question, because I haven't had that asked at all. So that day that I was in the hospital that I gave birth to him, it was a lot. I think it was a lot going on to where I was distracted. It was so much going on. It's like so much paperwork. People were coming in and out, checking in. Family was coming in and out, and they were bringing all the stuff that I needed in regards to to plan the funeral process. And my job, they were really kind. They ended up picking out they actually picked out a box for my son to be buried in. And so they took care of that. And a lot of it, to be honest with you, I kind of don't remember. And it's so funny because with me doing this interview with you, me talking about it, a lot of times it's like you get so mixed up in the story because of the time that had went by and just so much stuff had happened during that time, and you want to make sure you get the key points. But so there was so much going on that I was distracted, and I honestly was numb throughout this whole process. When I went back home, I had some family, get together. It was just like it was your normal funeral. After the funeral services, prior to the funeral services, like I told you, the doctors had came and they had gave me 3 bottles of something. I have no clue what any of them were. We ended up going home, and I remember my boyfriend at the time literally almost broke the hospital doors going out the doors because he was so angry. And I remember going in the car. I really didn't talk much. I really didn't say much, but people did the best that they could to really make the best out of the moment for me. I had a great support system at the time. I remember coming home, and my girlfriend's boyfriend at the time, he knew how anal I was about my home and how I like the house to be clean a certain way. I have never allowed anybody to clean my house, and this man cleaned my house to a T, to the way that I would love it to be done. And I came back, the house was spotless, and all I wanted to do was just lay down. And I remember my boyfriend at the time wanted to make things as normal as possible. So he went out and he went and got a Christmas tree. And my son, I gave birth to him December 5th. So he wanted to prepare for Christmas as if, nothing had happened. So he wanted to go and get that Christmas tree. He was adamant about it. And his mother, I thank God for his mother. And after we had got married and everything else like that, I mean, his mom has played a huge role as far as when I just came from the hospital. She was a huge support system, helping me basically take care of myself, making sure that I ate. She stayed with us for an entire week. And you know how when you go through the whole grieving process and you lose a loved one and everybody is around for that first week or first 2 weeks and first 3 weeks, and the cards are coming in, the calls are coming in, the text messages are coming in. And when she left, it was like, I was afraid to be alone. I feared being alone. I have no idea why. I became instantly connected to my boyfriend at the time. And it was like I could not lose someone else. I was in so much fear at the time. So when she left, it was very traumatic for me. She was cooking, cleaning, helping out at the house. And I instantly attached to my boyfriend at the time. And it wasn't a healthy attachment because little did I know he was grieving at the time. And I knew that he was grieving, but it was like I latched to him as a source of my happiness or something. It wasn't even happiness. It was like I needed someone there. And this is, it's a big story, hence the fact of my book. But we were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time of this process. We ended up getting married on Christmas Day. So 3 weeks later. And it was kind of like we made this rushed decision because it's like, oh, well, we've been through hell and back together. Why not commit to each other and become married or get married? And we made a decision out of, us grieving and not really paying attention to the long-term haul of our ability to have a healthy relationship. So he was grieving and I was grieving. We both grieved differently. And I took off my whole entire maternity leave. And that's something that I want women to acknowledge, because that is extremely, extremely, extremely important. Society tells us when and how to grieve. And they give us so many days that we're supposed to be prepared and ready to be back into our regular lives. And I don't think a lot of women, whether it's a miscarriage, any type of form of fetal loss, they do not take the time to take that time off that they allowed us to heal. And I took my 3 months because I gave birth. I had a child. And even though that child wasn't physically there, I needed that time to process just everything. One thing that I can say is that my boyfriend at the time during the grieving, those 3 bottles that they gave me of medication, he threw out. The only one that he threw them out, and he gave me an anti-anxiety medication before I had left to go to his funeral. I remember this. And I took it, and I sat there and I was very numb. I really didn't know what to feel. And I think that it never really hit me until maybe 3 months later. So it was like, I'm going back into my reality now. It's like, I have to go back to work. I have to go back to my relationships with friends. I have to go back to society like nothing ever happened. So my innocence was broken. My form of innocence is broken because this is not a part of the normal human process to lose a child. So at the time, and I wrote about this in the book as well, it's called Crocodile Tears. It's a chapter. And I recall seeing my friend's mother, who I haven't seen my friends in like maybe 2 months at this point. And I recall seeing my friend's mother. We walk into each other and she ends up telling me that my friend is pregnant now. And I was a little disappointed, for one, that the mom told me and not my friend at the time. But she had told me they were pregnant, and I was feeling some type of way because I felt like a lot of people were kind of not spending time with me and stuff because they didn't know what to say, but I felt like I was diseased, like I had something wrong with me and nobody wanted to spend time with me. But people were avoiding me because they really didn't know what to say to me. But that's another thing. In your situation, when you're going through something and when you're going through that healing process, people may not know what to say, but their presence speaks volumes. And we never know what went on with us, like our traumatic situation of fetal loss. We don't really know how that affects other people until later on you're able to look at the broader perspective of the whole situation. But at the time, you're so focused on trying to save yourself because in all reality, you're trying to learn how to heal from your situation. And I remember her telling me about them being, conceived. And I just remember going to my car and I cried for like 2 hours in my car. And at this time, my now husband was partying his grieving away. So he was away in Miami with his friends, kind of going in reverse and doing the things that at that time was helping him to be distracted from the situation. And as a man, he didn't want to speak about it. He didn't want to hear his name. It was like I was alone at that time. It's like, you know what? I became so dependent on him for his happiness. For him to help fill me. And at that time, he was trying to save himself. And it was like, now I have to save myself. Because when death hits home, it's like it's every man for himself at that point. And I sat in my car for like 3 hours crying the ugly cry to where my soul hurt, not even knowing at that time I was pregnant with my then now son, Micah.
Wow.
And I sat in the car and I cried. This is 3 months later. And I sat in a car crying, like so angry at God for knowing that before my son, there was so much that I went through as a child. There was so much stuff that I went through as a human being, and people always identified me with being strong. And I despise the term now because I felt like people knowing me as the strong person and being this resilient person, it was like, oh, she's gonna be okay. And I wasn't. And I wasn't at the time. And it was like, yes, she is resilient because I have to be. But I had no clue at that time while I'm sitting up there crying, angry at God, shouting at him, telling him, how could you do this to me? I lost my grandmother. I found my uncle dead. I've seen certain things in life and I've been through so much stuff and I've done everything that you've asked me to do. I'm kind, I'm this, and how could you do this to me? I was very angry. And I needed to be in that space and I needed to feel that way. And I needed to know that it was okay. And I think a lot of women can fall into depression when they feel as though that their feelings of anger is not acceptable by society or it's not acceptable by other people. And you need to allow yourself to feel. And if I would have, and I don't knock anyone for their decisions to do whatever it is that they need to do, whether it's taking antidepressants, whether it's doing whatever it is that they need to do. There are so many different other avenues. And I feel like we distract ourselves and we numb ourselves from the healing process. And if we don't allow ourselves to feel, the healing process will take forever. And so I needed to go through that anger and blame and all the different stages of it. And when I say I became obsessed with trying to find answers, I wanted to find answers. And normally with me, it's like if someone dies, you know how like if someone passes away for like 3 months, you're evaluating your life. You're like, what is my purpose? What is my life supposed to be about? What is this life? You know, this, that, and the other. But when your child dies, it's a whole different story. And you see things in a different view. And so I noticed the healing process began when I did that breakdown cry. And I remember maybe a week later, I picked up the phone and I called my girlfriend at the time. Her cousin was having a baby. And I got sick and tired of looking at my son's stuff in his room. Everything was sitting in the room nicely put together still. I left everything in there. Everything was nicely made. His bed, everything, the nursery room looked absolutely beautiful. My husband at the time was at work. I called her over and I said, can you please come and pick up the stuff? I was like, you can have the stuff for the baby. And she was like, well, why would you do that? Like, you know, you can have another baby. You know, you can have another boy. You never know. Just hold on to the stuff. And, you know, why are you doing that? I said, no, come pick up the stuff. I said, I want you to have it for your child because I knew she was having a baby. And once again, I was pregnant at the time, but I did not know. So she came and she picked up everything and people were wondering if I had lost my mind at that time. I had to purge and cleanse and I needed to let go. God was telling me I needed to let go. He needed to see how much I was willing to give. I felt like he wanted to see if I would be able to let go of what I thought should be as opposed to what he had in store for me. And I did. And that's the reason why I have the son that I have today. I truly, honestly believe.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Living Waters Doula Services. Are you currently trying to conceive or expecting? Join me for 6 weeks as we guide you through the anxiety, fear, and stress of a pregnancy after loss. This course begins on April the 23rd, and we will meet weekly to go through topics like stress, self-care, identifying, connecting with this pregnancy, and maximizing memories as you try to conceive. This course is for you if you are trying to conceive and are currently pregnant and need some support and guidance as you go through this new journey with the pregnancy after loss or infertility. Join us for 6 weeks beginning April 23rd. Go to ericaandmcafee.com/courses for more information.
Absolutely. So I just have a question around when you said you were trying to figure out exactly what happened. Did you all go back to the hospital and do any malpractice suits or anything like that because of just the matriculation of how your amniotic fluid ended up not being in by the time they, when you got to the hospital at the last time?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So we did proceed with a lawsuit in which we did settle. Now, one thing, of course, I can't go into details about it because of the legal stipulations behind it. However, one thing that I want Black women and women of color to know, because it's so interesting because we tend to think that I'm a firm believer there is no coincidences. And I believe that everything happens for a reason. And again, when you're going through something traumatic like this, you don't want to hear that. And I understand it. But we as Black women and women of color, me working in clinical research, what I do see is that we are not represented. We are not represented because many of us are not educated about clinical research, so on and so forth. One problem that I have identified is that in the medical field, women need to be more of an advocate about their health care. You are the driver of this body that you carry every day. And we tend to not question two people. I've noticed in the Black community, we tend to not question our pastors, and we don't question the physicians. And I think that you need to ask questions. These are very important aspects of your lives, and we need to question the physician when it comes to our healthcare. A lot of women are out there, and it's like we have high blood pressure, things that they may consider normal in the African American community, but it's truly not. So we need to get our lab work, get your medical history, obtain those, ask questions. Because when a physician diagnoses you with anything, or when you're going to the doctor's office, they're diagnosing you off of the strength of what you're telling them and also off of your lab work. You're the one that needs to identify what's going on with your body. They don't know. They only go by what you tell them. And I think that it's important for us to start asking questions and become more of an active advocate in our healthcare. And so when it came down to that, I took the advice of the doctor by them telling me, no, your water didn't break. They practically told me what did not happen with my body, knowing as a woman, this is something different. I know I didn't pee on myself. This is my first pregnancy. And now I'm questioning myself because this physician that has a medical degree that obviously is more intelligent than me, they told me this is not what happened to my body. So I just accepted it. They have to know more than I know. They weren't there. We need to start questioning, obtaining more information, and getting a better understanding of our healthcare and our medical care.
Absolutely. So I'm happy that I asked that. You know, that's the first thing that popped in my head. And watching enough, law TV shows, you're like, hold on, that doesn't sound good.
No, it didn't. Mm-hmm.
I'm happy that you did. You are an advocate for yourself, even through the grief, that you all were able to settle and have that go on. So
now that's a whole nother process too, because now when you're going through that, the doctors don't deem a 41-week pregnancy as an actual baby. So that's a whole nother thing. And in the court systems, for them to weigh the monetary compensation for what you should receive is what the value of your life of your child is. So can you imagine having this conversation with someone?
Exactly.
And it's like, that's something that no one could ever know. And I write about that. I received an apology, a monetary apology, and it could never bring my son back. Absolutely not. Could not bring my son back.
Absolutely. So take us back on your journey to your rainbow baby. So now that I'm sure this all kind of happened around the same time. You got pregnant 3 months after. You probably were going through, thinking about doing a lawsuit or doing whatever, and then grieving at the same time. So really take us back on that journey to motherhood with your rainbow baby, and then how that pregnancy matriculated, especially going through anxiety and fear and all of the other emotions that come up as you grieve, as well as being pregnant.
Yes. So I talk about this in the book, and this is why I wanted to give you some insight. So I honestly feel like this whole process, like I said, there's a huge overall picture to things. And I split my book up in 3 different sections, and it's called Before London, Love London, which is Amour, it's in French, some of it as well. And then After London. And so my life before him was pretty much kind of, when I was talking about my childhood, that kind of contributed to the relationship that I decided to get in as I became an adult. And at this time, like I said, I was married and I was already I already knew emotionally abusive relationship. And I thought that, of course, that us doing things the right way, that maybe could change things. So things were going great after we had got married. And that was 3 weeks after the loss of my son. 3 months in, I obviously find out that I had conceived Micah. And I go ahead and tell my then husband that I had took a pregnancy test, and I realized that I had missed a period and I had took a pregnancy test, and I had called him, and this is when he was away. And I told him that I was pregnant, and he responded with, "What are you going to do?" That to me was a punch in the stomach. I know that that wasn't something to be excited about after going through exactly what we just went through. I don't know what he was thinking at the time, but what I can say is that the last thing on my mind was for someone to even question me about even asking me, what are we going to do if we're even going to go through with having the child? After losing one, and at that moment in time, I started to transition into this. I was resurrected. I felt like into this new person. I was reborn. And it was like, at this point, if he is not going to celebrate this child, I don't care who doesn't celebrate it. I knew how important this time around that it was for me to protect my womb space. And that's a whole nother thing. Women need to identify with that our realities outside of our bodies, that is all being inflicted in our womb space, whether it is negativity, whatever it is that's going on in your life. You have to stay away from it just for the simple fact that that is what your child is breathing in. And I knew how important it was for me to protect my son that I have now. And if that meant me disconnecting from his father as well, then so be it. During that pregnancy, I was on everybody's case. I was at every doctor's appointment asking a million questions. And the crazy thing about it is that 5 months, the story is just insane. 5 months in of my pregnancy, I remember going to pick up my husband at the time from work. We were sharing a vehicle, and I got into a bad car accident, terrible car accident. I had a brand new SUV, someone T-boned me at a light. They ran the red light and my SUV flipped over and went over the light post.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember seeing the person that hit me, he got out his car and ran. He had a small little Dodge Neon. He got out his car and ran. And I remember getting out the car because I wanted to get out because I saw oil coming from his car. And this was downtown on a main street. And so many people kept running out and they saw that I was pregnant. I was 5 months in. The ambulance came and picked me up. And to be honest with you, when I got hit, I said, I'm not going to make this. And it was just very scary for me. And then when I had actually got out the car, I was just like, oh my gosh. And I got out without any scratch, not a scratch at all.
Nothing but God.
And I remember I was in panic because I didn't give a damn about myself. The whole time I'm like, is the baby okay? So got to the hospital. I didn't want them to touch me, just check to see if the baby was okay. And I remember being in an emergency room and he goes, he's okay. He's doing great. I said, he? at this time, now girls can find out the sex of the baby like at 13 weeks, I believe. And I, at the time, didn't know what I was having. And I was supposed to be scheduled, I think, the following week to find out the sex of the baby. And he goes, "Oh, sorry, you didn't know?" And he told me, he was like, "He is fine. He's doing well." And it was like so scary for me. So it was just like, wow, you get into a car accident, you just lost a child. So I was really in panic mode. So throughout that pregnancy, I had a really great doctor. I ended up switching practices, of course. And he knew how to deal with me. He was very kind. There was multiple discussions about whether or not they wanted to put me on antidepressants during my pregnancy. And I was so against it. I mean, like I said, as a woman, it depends on your mental state. But if it outweighs, the health of the child, kind of like if your mental state is just, you definitely need it, definitely go for it. But I knew that I was doing other things, whether it was me exercising or spending time with really good energy to keep my head in a good space. And so I made sure that I steered away from that. But the doctor was very kind to me. The staff was very kind to me. They knew my situation and they were very supportive. So to go further on into pregnancy, I remember the day. So I wanted to be induced at early. And due to the March of Dimes, my doctor kept saying to me, "No, you can't do it. We have a certain cutoff for the March of Dimes. You cannot be induced early." Because I did not want to go into labor on my own. Because I was like, I went into labor on my own before. They told me I didn't. If my body cannot go into labor on its own, I need to be induced. Induce me as early as possible. I don't want to go through this at all. So we had fought and fought and fought. And so then I think it was around 37 weeks, they decided that they would schedule me to be induced. So I went in. I remember sleeping at my friend's house because I was still in a relationship with the father. I'm trying to make that situation work. But I was primarily just focused on me doing what I need to do at that time. And I remember staying at my friend's house at the time. They had their son who was born a couple of months before I went to be induced. I had woke up that morning. I had went and got a pedicure. Our bags were packed. There was just something about the day that I was going in to be induced that it just felt right. It felt like I had God's grace that day. And I went and got my pedicure, and then I went home, and my husband at the time had stepped out before he was going to go and load the car. And I sat there and I was watching a show, and it just so happened I was watching like Grey's Anatomy or something like that. And the show that I was watching, the episode creeped me out because the woman, she went in to get induced, had an emergency C-section. She died on the table, and then the baby lived. That's the wrong thing to see before you go into birth after just losing a child. So I'm like, my blood pressure is probably through the roof. So I go in and I'm trying to relax myself, but it was just such good energy. Like the family was very supportive. Everybody that needed to be there was there. I had a girlfriend who was a very long-term friend of mine who she was in law school and she could not make it. And she's actually disabled and she's in a wheelchair. She did not make it to be there when London was born, and she was in law school. And not only that, but she was afraid to be there as well. And this woman had sat in my room until I gave birth to Micah in her wheelchair with her law school stuff that entire time. And now what the interesting part is, London was born vaginally. Micah, they induced me and his heart rate started to plummet. And guess what had to happen? I had to go in emergency C-section after watching that Grey's Anatomy episode. I go into tears and I am panicking, crying. I'm telling everybody I'm about to die just because of the episode. And I just was like, this is not how I envisioned having my son. I did not want to do this. And I'm just like, geez, I had got the experience of both, like, you know. So we went in and I recall, you know, them giving me all the drugs that I needed to get me suited up and everything else like that. And I remember just laying on the table and I had this like shortness of breath. And I kept looking at, they put that thing, the sheet over you, like you can't see anything, but they got this metal light right above me. So I can see a mirror of them like cutting me open, and just the anxiety, like even though I couldn't feel anything, I could feel the pressure of them digging. But all I wanted to hear, I was like, if I have to go through hell and back to get him, then that's what I'm going to do. They brought him out, and then the doctor said he is healthy, and he started to scream. And it was just like, I did it. Like I finally did it. And I don't know if you had this experience as well, but there's a feeling that a woman feels like when she goes through like fetal loss. It's like, I'm a woman, and that's the first thing that I'm required to do, like, is give birth to a child. And I'm sure many women that experience the inability to conceive or stuff like that, you have this feeling of insignificance or unworthiness as a woman, because that's the one thing that your contribution is to this world. And even though I went through this pregnancy with Micah, and I remember I was so drained after, because the C-section, I think personally, is more painful than vaginal birth. After being stitched up and them latching him onto me, I felt connected, but then I also felt disconnected. See, a lot of people think that, because you have a rainbow baby or a baby after the storm, that you're just going to forget about the child that you had before. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So many times that still till this day, my son, sometimes when someone asks me, what's my son's date of birth, I get it mixed up. There's been a lot of times where people would ask me, sometimes like family members still call my son London sometimes. But Micah, when he was born, it was this sense of connection. And it took me this connection, but disconnection. Like, you're here, but then someone else was supposed to be here before you. And then remember, I had got rid of everything. I was completely prepared for the first baby. The second baby, I had stuff, but not as much stuff as I did for London. I wasn't prepared for him physically, as far as having everything materialistically, like, because he had everything, but it wasn't as prepared, but I was emotionally ready for him. And I feel like when you go through a loss of a child, you have a greater sense of appreciation for the child that you do have. So I had that, he's crying, but I got to get up and feed him milk, but I'm so tired. But then remember when you didn't have the opportunity to feed a child? I'm so drained because, I'm overwhelmed with so much stuff and all this other stuff. But guess what? Remember when you didn't have that? So it's like you always got this in the back of your mind as a mother that you know what it's like to not have that soul, have that spirit there. My son is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. And I honestly believe that God sent him to me on purpose, for purpose. I have never felt such unconditional love. When I had him, me and his father was already going through stuff still. And after 3 months after having Micah was 3 months old, his father left and he moved to Pennsylvania. And I raised my son for an entire year by myself. His dad has been active. However, it's not how I expected him to be. But I can honestly say that my son has taught me everything in this healing process. The aspect of forgiveness, the aspect of learning how to look at the bigger picture, the unconditional love, the patience, not to be so hard on myself, and the drive. Like, my drive comes from him. Like, I feel like, to be honest with you, if I don't know what would have happened, but I've had suicidal thoughts when I had lost London. I would think about what my life would be if I wasn't there. I've had those thoughts. And it's like, when my son was born, it was like, wow. And for him to tell me all the time how important I am or how valuable I am. And he just reminded me of who I truly was as a person in my core being. He reminded me of the very things that I had forgot. So yes, sorry.
No, excellent. I love that he reminded you of the things that you forgot. And you're taking me on the journey with you, and I'm just remembering, oh girl, she's saying exactly how I felt about my losses. And I know the listeners are gaining so much from our conversation thus far. So let's talk about your book. Bring us forward. Let's talk about your book, what we can expect from your book, and then give everyone links or, tell people where they can go purchase.
Definitely. So London's Prince is a almost 7-year project that I started. I started to write when I returned back to the jail to go to work after my 3 months of taking work off. As soon as I got back to work, it was like I needed to make sense of life's nonsense, and writing helped me to do that. I would write myself emails. I would write myself notes in my phone. I just kept telling people like, I'm going to write a book, and people were like, are you crazy? This, that, and the other. And I have been through a divorce. I've been through separation. I've been through graduating from my undergrad. I went through so much stuff in between time, starting graduate school and dropping out because the book became much more important to me. So London's Prince. So my son, obviously, my first son that was stillborn, his name is London. I named him London Kyrie Exantis. I bought that book of 10,000 names, and London was the name that resonated with me because my boyfriend at the time, his nickname was London Boy because they said he had like an accent because he's a Haitian man, but they thought was a European accent, and absolutely not. Obviously, it was from his Creole language and the French, but so they called him London Boy. So I was like, I have to name him London. So I've never been to London before. However, that's my trip that I need to make for next year. Now, the Prince is prints. So your actual fingerprints. And the reason why they were so significant to me, and I wanted to put that on the book because for one, I know everybody has to be familiar with the Christian poem, Footprints in the Sand, when a man was walking along the sand and he noticed that there was only one set of footprints. He got angry with God because he felt like he left him, but it was that time that God had carried him. And I can honestly say our footprints, our fingerprints are very unique. It's a way that they utilize and they use it in criminal justice to identify us because, sometimes our physical aspects can look just like someone else, but our fingerprints are so unique. And I feel like my journey and my son's footprints had led me on a path to be reborn, to learn to live life. And it was like, with him not being able to breathe or to live life, it was like him sacrificing his life for me to actually live. And the reason why there's so much deeper to just losing a child, as I said before, the book is broken down in 3 different aspects, and it's before London, and there was before me. So I feel as though that we all are destined for certain things, in the way that, our parents conceive us, to what your mom was going through while you were in her womb space, that all is like reflects into who we are as a being, and it affects us. And I was born in toxicity. My dad, had issues with a drug addiction. My mom eventually became an alcoholic and stuff. And the women in my family were emotionally bankrupt because of relationships toxic relationships that they were in. They weren't invested emotionally within their children. However, they were like zombies, taking care of daily tasks, and, they were going through the pain and stuff of life, and they became bitter. And I have, my grandmother who had passed before me, and I seen her give so much of herself to everybody else. She breathed life into everybody else in the family, and she left here with nothing. And she, I believe, is guiding me along with my son, because they're reminding me how to prioritize and remember that outside of being anybody's wife or being anybody's mother, that I can only be best for them if I'm good to myself. So the book primarily talks about breaking the generational curse and finding self-love and knowing the importance of our relationships with people, whether it's an intimate relationship, our family relationships, our friendships. We need to identify what is not working for us and things that are not feeding our soul. And also, the book also goes into during London, my experiences during that, and then after going through a divorce, after being so attached to somebody. And it's so funny because in a way, it's like addictive behaviors. And society is really affected by this right now. I mean, we have social media, we have relationships. People are finding ways to attach themselves to things to distract themselves from the healing process. So I had to let go of everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. I wanted women to identify with the fact of who are you outside of who you do for and what you do. So that's why when people ask me the question, what do you do? I'm not a junior data manager. I am not just Micah's mom. I am a soul that is here individually on a journey that is seeking their purpose. And the reason why I say London's Prince is because I want people to identify with the fact that you're not going to find the answers to any of your journey in anybody else's book, anybody else's things. You can identify with things and they can resonate with you, but your journey is very unique, just like your fingerprints. And along the way, you'll notice that. And you can get key resources, you can find mentors, you can go seek counseling, you can do all those things that can help you to become a better version of you. But you have to tap into your inner source and your inner God and listen and silence yourself to find out where you need to take yourself next and what works best with you. So I really feel that my son's tiny set of footprints have left an imprint in my heart. And I had to finish this book. I felt God was telling me that nothing else is going to come to you until you do what I ask you to do. And he has called me to write this book. And at first it was more so like, I want to make a residual income. Everybody's looking to make more money. Everybody's looking to sell everybody. If you see it on social media now, everybody's like, I have the keys to find you a man or find keys to your romance or whatever. Everybody is preying on people's vulnerability to make a source of income. And to me, it's like, you're not going to find these keys until you tap into your own. Like, these can be resourceful, but they don't have the answers to your journey. I know now that this book is important for me to write because I needed to be a voice for everyone else. And it was so interesting how when I opened my mouth to speak about the fact that this happened to me, I can honestly say, I won't say, but a very high percentage of women in the reproductive ages experience some form of fetal loss to the point where I think it's insane. And a lot of women don't talk about it. Soon as I opened my mouth to speak, I spoke for not just myself, but I spoke for the women that came before me. And so I do a lot of motivational speaking. I try to motivate women when it comes to self-love. And when I'm teaching, I am also teaching myself. I am practicing exactly what I'm teaching. So I may come as one, but I'm, like they say I think it's an African proverb, or maybe it's, I believe it is, I'm trying to think. She says, I come as one, but I stand with 10,000 or something to that extent, but I'm standing with my ancestors and I'm guided by this. And I felt compelled to write this book because it is important. I want women to know that your toxic relationships affects your health, your spiritual, mental, all that stuff. It goes all financial, all that stuff falls into an umbrella of self-love. And it is important for us to focus on ourselves. And you can love your children to the death of you. But if you are not taking care of yourself, you are not good for your children. And so I talk about a lot of that in the book as well. And the importance of being a woman and being mindful that you have a purpose outside of being a wife and being a mother. And we have to be reminded of that. Don't forget to breathe breathe life into your own dreams as well, because we breathe into everybody else. And London's Prince can be found on Amazon.com. And also you can find it on barnesandnoble.com under London, LONDON_SPRINTS. And my name is Kieona Fairley. And you can also message me as well, because I have physical copies that I have been directly mailing. You can follow me on Instagram at London's Prince. And that's LONDONS_Prince, PRINTS. Or you can follow me on Facebook, Kieona Fairley, KIEONA, F as in Frank, AIRLEY.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kieona, for sharing your story and sharing your light and just taking us on the journey with you to your journey to motherhood. So I'm happy that you left all your links. I will make sure that they are all in the description box or the show notes for you all. And please give her a follow and go purchase her book, London's Prince. Thank you again, Kieona.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate it. You're doing an amazing job, and it's really important for us to utilize these platforms to heal people. And I feel like a lot of the platforms right now, healing is not cool, but it really is.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I pray that this show was inspirational and a blessing to you. For show notes, visit ericamcafee.com/podcast. Please join us in our offline discussions in our private Facebook group by going to sistersinloss.com. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please rate and subscribe to us and leave us a 5-star review. I pray that you all have a blessed week. Keep the faith, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday.